Hey, Jarek here, and I have seen a lot of misconceptions about what really defines a boomer shooter lately. Which is fair, because we don't really have an objective definition for this subgenre that we created on our own. There's no governing board deciding what a boomer shooter is, it just popped up because people love these old games. But while there's no strict definition, I do believe that there's qualities you will see in virtually every boomer shooter that makes it easier to define what they are, and more critically, define what games are not boomer shooters. A common misconception I've been seeing a lot lately is that all retro shooters are boomer shooters, which is simply untrue. Another very common misconception I've been seeing is that all GZ Doom games are boomer shooters. If this was the case, then this is a boomer shooter, and so is this. Obviously, the engine your game runs on does not define the genre of that game. There are two games that seem to be tripping up a lot of people when it comes to seeing what is or isn't a boomer shooter. That would be Half-Life and Selaco. Believe it or not, these two are not boomer shooters. But okay, let's take a step back. What do I consider a boomer shooter? To me, the vague definition is pretty simple. It is an FPS title with its roots in 90s first-person shooters. The most common games you'll see and used as inspiration for new boomer shooters are the original Doom, build engine games like Duke Nukem and Blood, and Quake. My god, lots and lots of Quake boomer shooters. Generally, these are fast-paced arena shooters that feel arcadey. Usually, you don't even have to reload. The goal of these games is not immersion or telling a story, it's just balls to the walls action. With all of this said, a lot of boomer shooters you see will look like old retro 90 FPS games, because those are the games that have inspired the devs to make a new game of their own. This does not mean a boomer shooter needs to look like a retro FPS to be a boomer shooter. To me, what defines a boomer shooter is the mechanics of the game. What's the gameplay like? Selaco is a really good example here, because this game is simply not a boomer shooter. This game has some similarities with things like Doom, but it largely doesn't play like Doom or Quake. The most obvious inspiration for Selaco is F.E.A.R. and other games that came out in the mid-2000s. While action is very in your face and over the top, it feels a bit slower than those boomer shooters. It has reloading mechanics, enemy AI that is smarter than simply running straight at you. Most importantly, it has things that you will almost never see in a boomer shooter. This game is full of environmental storytelling. There is a lot of downtime in this game to simply explore. I'm convinced that a lot of people think Selaco is a boomer shooter purely because of its aesthetics. I haven't heard a single person say that the original F.E.A.R. is a boomer shooter, even though the gameplay is extremely similar. Obviously not identical, the Selaco team didn't just recreate F.E.A.R. But if we're judging a game off of feel, then Selaco feels a lot more like F.E.A.R. It feels a lot less like the original Doom, or even more modern Dooms like Doom 2016. And Doom 2016 is its own unique case, as I consider these games to sort of be the evolution of the boomer shooter. They're still boomer shooters, but almost a subgenre of a subgenre. But I've been leaving one really important game out, the original Half-Life. This is a game that came out in the 90s, the late 90s anyway, came out in 98. But this game is monumentally important to boomer shooters because it almost killed them. Half-Life's release was a massive shift to the first-person shooter genre. We went from every game wanting to be Doom and Quake to every game wanting to be Half-Life. Even Doom, the game that so many boomer shooters are inspired by, shifted to try to recreate sort of a Half-Life feel with Doom 3. The name of the game in the early 2000s was Immersion. That was Half-Life's goal, to place you in Black Mesa, to create this universe around you, and to get a story going. Now, Half-Life 1 still has some of that Quake feel because it runs on the same engine and you run very fast. That's a product of its time. But I think anyone can play Quake right into Half-Life and tell you that they're very different games. On top of this, it overlaps with people that think that games with old retro graphics are all boomer shooters. Obviously, this is untrue, but to make a really good example, some people would look at Half-Life 1 and say, yes, that's a boomer shooter, but then look at Black Mesa and say, no, that's not a boomer shooter, even though they're almost the same game. Yes, there is stark differences in feel of the game engine and whatnot, but it's Half-Life nonetheless. If this is not a boomer shooter, then this is not either. Now, why is any of this important? Well, it's not really that much, but I do think it's important to a certain degree. That degree is that I really like early to mid-2000 shooters, and they kind of don't exist anymore. I'll make a remark about how boomer shooters are fun, but I really prefer games more like Half-Life or F.E.A.R. and then be met with someone saying, so you just like boomer shooters? Or a really good game like Selaco will come out that is inspired by F.E.A.R. and then people will say, oh, it's just another boomer shooter. And saying Selaco is just another boomer shooter is obviously really incorrect and downplays everything that team has done for the game. If there's two things you should take away from this video, is that boomer shooters have their gameplay roots set in 90s FPS games, even if they have evolved to the point of being Ultra Kill or Doom Eternal. Those are still boomer shooters, just a different brand of boomer shooter. And the second point is that aesthetics and graphics do not define the boomer shooter. Not every shooter with retro graphics is a boomer shooter. Not every shooter that was made before you were born is a boomer shooter, because I know I've seen that one a lot. And I'm not saying that in the old man way of saying kids grow up with garbage video games nowadays, they don't know what good quality content is. No, I'm 33 years old, so I have a lot of friends that are in their 20s that never played Half-Life or F.E.A.R, and I always go out of my way to have them try it out. But there is definitely a certain line of thinking of if this is before my time, it's a boomer shooter, which is obviously incorrect. It's also really amusing to people that grew up around those games. I'll add one more point to take away from when it comes to this video. Half-Life's not a boomer shooter, because I've seen that way too much. It just isn't. That's why we created our own genre called Half-Likes. Alright, this video is a little bit different. I posted a review earlier this week because an embargo lifted on a Tuesday, which is odd, and I like posting on Fridays, which would leave a really big gap between videos, and I didn't want to do that, so I made this one. Big thanks to everyone that follows me over on Twitch and hangs out over there. I stream fairly often, and it's a lot of fun, just kind of playing games and talking to you guys. Twitch.tv/JarekTheGamingDragon if you want to go follow. Big thanks to my YouTube members. They get to see my videos early, sometimes a month ahead of time if I'm stockpiling videos. Thanks to all you guys that have subscribed. I'm so close to 250k. I want to get there someday. And just a big thanks to everyone that's still watching this video in the outro card. I'll see you next time.